Some really interesting polling just came out from Gallup. And I would say at this point, I would call this poll an outlier, although it is consistent with a trend in terms of public sentiment around immigration that we have seen reflected in other polls as well. So let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. According to Gallup, we now have a huge surge in the number of people who say, hey, actually, I don't want immigration decreased. I want it to stay the same. A significant surge also in those who say, actually want it increased, and a major decline in those who say they want it decreased. So now the plurality of people say, hey, let's just keep things status quo at the present level. But even more significant, we actually have a record-breaking number of people who say that immigration is a good thing for this country today. So it has spiked up to now 79% of the public who say overall they think immigration is a good thing for the country. It's worth noting this number has always actually been above water. The lowest was near 50%. That was in the year 2002. It was at 52%. But even as recently as 2024, when you had sort of like a nadir in support for immigration in this country, it was still at 64%. But you've got a huge increase there to a record-breaking number of 79% who are like, you know what? On net, I think immigrants are really a benefit to this country. They pulled a bunch of other, you've got significant, obviously, partisan divides with regards to immigration, but they pulled a number of other questions, and the shifts are all in the same direction, shifting towards more tolerance and support for immigration, less tolerance and support for example, hiring significantly more Border Patrol agents. Those numbers declined by 17%. And it's not a mystery to understand, Saagar, why this is going on. People are seeing the reality of the Trump administration's immigration policy. They're seeing these raids, including ICE agents in like military gear and marching down suburban streets or riding on horseback through a park. They're seeing Alligator Alcatraz. They're seeing CCOT, the lack of due process. They're seeing the distance between the rhetoric of, hey, we're going to be targeting the criminals, to the reality of, no, actually, we're going to be going to the Home Depot, going to the 7-Eleven, et cetera. And it has caused a significant, I think you can say at this point, backlash to the Trump administration's direction.
Yeah, I mean, I warned about this in the beginning of the Trump administration, the laws of thermostatic public opinion. There's probably no better issue than immigration. Whenever Trump is in office the first time around, record support for immigration. When Biden's in office, record low support for immigration. Now we're right back to where it is. The question is about solving a consensus. And to the extent that I think that the Trump administration can be criticized the most, it is for shows of force compared to any sort of semblance of process and of stability. I talked about this during LA. The reason people turned against the Biden administration was the reality of 8 to 10 million people who flowed illegally into our country in an insane process. It was chaotic. And so the promise was, we're going to solve the chaos. And on the border, it's empirically true. They have. I mean, their border crossings are basically zero right now. And so in a way, they're almost benefiting from the success of the problem that they were truly elected to solve immediately on border. Then it's become a question of enforcement and or deportation. So it's one thing to have deportation or increase in the ICE budget of going after criminals, increasing investigation. It's another to send, active duty U.S. Marines to the streets of Los Angeles. It's another to have Alligator Alcatraz. And then even on the question of Alcatraz, it's like one of those questions of specifically to emphasize like the alligators there and the vibe of it. I understand tactically why they're doing it, which is the truth is that no matter how much money you spend, deporting 20 to 30 million people is like would cost hundreds of billions of dollars. A lot of it is about self-deportation. They have succeeded. Over 1 million people have self-deported in the last 6 months, at least rough estimate from the government figures. I'm not sure if we can trust that per se. But what we're watching is the thermostatic public opinion in effect. So I guess at this point, here's my advice to Democrats. Don't overread what these things actually mean. Last time around, they're like, see, the public is with us, and that means we shouldn't enforce border laws at all. 8 to 10 million people is good. We need to decriminalize border crossings, free healthcare for illegals, and all of this. You guys have your moment at this point, and you need to kind of settle on like what the status quo going forward should look like. And I think ultimately, the failure of the last multiple administrations on immigration is either punting things for amnesty while not having enforcement, basically allowing rage to bubble up around the issue. I think the Trump administration, unfortunately, has just decided, for these big headline grabbing things, as opposed to actually trying to come to sort of consensus, around this. And so it is now a live ball, an issue also which they've ceded so much ground on not just with CCOT, but by turning it also into an Israel issue, which actually makes it, in my opinion, much worse for them.
Yeah.
Because it makes it seem capricious to the ends of their own individual priorities and not about America. Because it's not just about the illegals here. We're talking about the Mahmoud Khalil case. We're talking about the Ozturk case. We're also talking about foreigners being detained for having memes on their phones when entering the United States under tourism visa. That the totality of that comes down to like, oh, hold on a second. We asked for law. I mean, if you look at the rhetoric, it was law and order. And I think that what we've had right now, it just strays far away from that to the public, and specifically the independent mind. It makes it very, very difficult. So I actually think this is a democratic issue now where you guys need to solve it for yourselves. And I'm curious to see what ground, that they end up with for what does the next Democratic candidate actually say on the issue of immigration? It can't be Kamala. Definitely can't be 2019. It can't be 2024 either. It's got to be something authentic and kind of interesting to this moment. But anyway.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And the Israel part is interesting to me because I was thinking the same thing. And it's not just that it makes it seem like very clear this is just like an ideological tool being used against, people the administration doesn't like or their ideological enemies. It also made it feel very personal.
It is personal, quite literally.
Yeah, because it was like, oh, you can't even write a freaking op-ed about this and you're being kidnapped off the streets? That's insane. And so when you had that combined at the very same time with these guys, many of whom were completely innocent, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, of course, who was wrongfully deported with zero due process, it doesn't take a genius either to figure out like, oh, if they get no due process, like they didn't even have to prove that they were illegal immigrants. Like they could just ship out anyone that they wanted to. So very quickly out of the gates, it became no longer about, oh, some sort of undefined, distant group of potential criminals. It became like, oh, this is about us. This is about all of us. And I think that really, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case really was a turning point in terms of Trump administration numbers on this issue. And so while, I think you're right, I think Democrats have to figure out, how do you have your own semblance of like, okay, there's going to be order, because I do think people want to feel like, okay, we know who's coming in and there's some sort of a process here and it makes sense. But I do also think that there's lessons for centrists here. I mean, number one, there was this assumption that just like the immigration numbers are what they are and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. That's clearly not true. People change their minds based on reality and what arguments are being presented to them and like how the issue is being framed and, just what reality is at the time. So a public opinion can and does change, number one. And number two, there was a real reluctance from centrists in particular to fight even on something like Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Remember, they were like, you should just be talking about the price of eggs.
I remember.
Well, now, at this point, actually, Trump's immigration numbers have fallen off even more than his economic numbers and are one of the sort of key sources of dissatisfaction with the public. So that was a dead wrong analysis. It was wrong morally, in my opinion, but it was also wrong politically. And people like Chris Van Hollen, who went down to El Salvador, and the folks who really made this and prioritized that issue, again, it was the right moral thing. It was also the right political choice and has now created a weakness for Trump on the issue where he was previously strongest, which is a classic political tactic of like, don't you go after the person's strength. That's actually the best way to bring someone down. So I think you had a combination of, number one, this became very quickly like, oh, this isn't about them. This is about us. Number two, I do think the imagery that they are intentionally cultivating to try to trigger these self-deportations, and this is all being run by Stephen Miller, that same imagery of the ICE agents always being masked, of sometimes not identifying themselves, not having warrants, the show of force with like all of this freaking military gear, the literal deployment of National Guardsmen and Marines in the streets of LA, the way that these shows of force have occurred in just like, there's a video of like ICE agents all kitted out marching down the street in suburban Utah. People are like, what the fuck is going on here? To arrest some like landscaper? What is going on? So I think that in addition to then CCOT and the cruelty there, Alligator Alcatraz, and it's very intentional, the language choice and the decision to sort of highlight the punitive nature of what is being done here. I think when you put all of those things together and that sense of like, this is actually creating more chaos in my community, I think those are the things that have sort of like turned this issue as significantly as it
I
ultimately has.
don't really disagree. What I would also caution for a lot of people is, and this is always my problem with the talk about immigration, they don't distinguish in the Gallup poll between legal and illegal immigration. And I would be willing to bet that if you actually looked at the way that people feel about unchecked illegal migration, like what was happening under the Biden administration, I'd be willing to bet that those are still some pretty negative numbers. And that's part of why for the Democrats in the future, you guys need to figure out like how you can come to some sort of consensus on the issue. The way that the Republicans got to where they are right now is that for basically 40 years, they were told amnesty is good, we'll do amnesty, and eventually we'll do border security. And in that time, the illegal immigration population explodes under Bush, under Obama, under Trump, and eventually they're like, no, I'm done. And then Biden, of course, is like fire forever. And so they don't even want to talk here about amnesty until a massive deportation effort begins to happen. On the immigration side and question for the Democrats, it's also still remains like immigration numbers have fallen for Trump. It's still one of his stronger issues. And, you know, it's not like he can't exactly get to a place where you could declare legitimate victory. I mean, look at the border security numbers or the border crossing numbers from the Biden administration compared to today. It's unbelievable. In a way, they're almost a victim of their own success because now people are looking at the deportation efforts in Los Angeles or Utah or whatever, and there's no more chaos at the border because it's a solved question. It's like, no, you're staying in Mexico and you're not coming here. So the question is there around what the future looks like for our policy. And look, on the Trump administration thing, my problem for them, at least, you know, as somebody who's generally sympathetic, I still support mass deportation, but the way that they had done it is such that their trust in all their information is zero after CCOT.
Yeah.
Because they said very specifically, maybe I'm a fool. I believe them. I was like, okay, I mean, these guys are gang members. I said the federal government for years has always validated gang members. I mean, this is not a difficult policy to be able to figure out. Go ask anybody in the Bureau of Prisons. There's an entire process. How do we validate people who are in gangs? Maybe there's, you know, some questions around that, but fine. Well, you know, broadly, I was like, I don't think we have much of an issue. And then you look at the stuff and you're like, okay, I mean, there's a lie. And then you look at the Israel stuff and you're like, okay, well, that's a lie too. And so you start to get the credibility gap on the issue such that you really, even when you are, in my opinion, sometimes deporting people who really deservedly need to get the hell out of here, shouldn't even be here. But then you have an open conversation where people are not even going to be able to trust some of the facts that you're putting out. And so when you have that out on the ether, I think it's very, very difficult for all of them. But I don't know. I mean, look, for me, I had a conversation in 2016 with somebody who I really respect. And he said, Donald Trump will be the worst thing that ever happened to the immigration restriction movement. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And he was like, listen, guys, what's going to happen is they're going to go full retard. They're going to do it in the dumbest way possible, and they're going to polarize the public against all of this. And I was like, yeah, that maybe it's valid, but look at all these other Republicans. They're all pro-amnesty and all of that. And, you know, now I'm starting to think he might be right. But, I mean, it took years, for him
sort
to
of
be
like what's happening with tariffs.
It's, in some ways, yeah, you're right. It's like, if you know, in some ways, it's like maybe this was the enemy of the cause all along. The counter for what they would say is nobody else has the balls to just do it. He's in his second term. He's got 3.5 more years to go. You can get a lot of million people out of this country and nobody else will do it. And then from that point forward, it's a future question. I guess I could see both sides, but, you know, as somebody who generally kind of likes to see some sort of consensus on the issue, I don't see it coming anytime soon.
In this particular poll, he only gets 35% approval of his handling.
Like you said, it's a leading outlier.
35%.
Yeah.
And among independents, you have, I'm doing the math, I'm bad at math, 69% disapproval. 45% of them strongly disapprove. So almost half of independents say they strongly disapprove. And then an additional 24% says they disapprove, but not strongly. And then you only have 28% who approve. This, again, independents that I'm talking about here, who say they approve. So, you know, it's obviously highly polarized. Republicans are very content, very happy with the immigration policy. Democrats are 81% say they strongly disapprove. But that number from independents to me was really quite significant. And, you know, they're not letting up. They just passed the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is going to surge massive amounts of resources into ICE. And so, you know, you're talking about whatever we're seeing now times however much. Now, I will say, these organizations are often incompetent. I think they'll have a hard time hiring and deploying, and a bunch of the money will just be basically like stolen by private prison contractors who never really deliver what they promise, and other consultants, et cetera. So there will be some discount on the money that's actually allocated, but they're about to have all of the resources in the world to do whatever they want. So one of the things that I think is contributing to these very grim numbers on an issue that was previously a strength for Donald Trump is the display of so-called Alligator Alcatraz down in Florida. You just had a couple of members of Congress go and tour that facility. And there had been previous reporting, too, to back up the comments here from, we're going to play a little bit of Maxwell Frost, about the truly abhorrent conditions in which people are being held within this facility. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
They opened the door. There was about 6 security guards standing there, kind of pushing us back, but we could see in and we could hear everybody. And when those doors opened, what I saw made my heart sink. I saw 32 people per cage, about 6 cages in the one tent. I saw a lot of people, young men who looked like me and people who were my age. People were yelling, "Help me, help me." I heard in the back someone say, "I'm a U.S. citizen." And as we were walking away, they started chanting, "Libertad, libertad, libertad, freedom." And in looking into these cages, you could see, of course, it was warm and hot within the tent. People were sweating. Some people had taken off the top of their clothing because it was just so hot. Some of them were drenched in sweat. The food we saw is not enough food. They're being fed essentially a small sandwich and a bag of chips. And not just that, but the conditions outside, of course, it's blazing hot. And the fact that into the cage comes from the toilet. Number one, not everyone's going to be able to drink as much water as they'd like to because of that inconvenience, but also it's gross and it's disgusting. And this is where people are being held.
So we've seen reporting indicating, backing up what he's saying there, we've seen reporting of worms in the food. We've seen reporting of toilets that don't flush and sewage on the floor, insect infestations, and the like. And then you ask yourself, Saagar, to your point, like, okay, well, who are they sending there? Because this is another instance where we were told this is only for the worst of the worst, right? Let's put this up on the screen. Miami Herald has been doing some great work on this. Hundreds at Alligator Alcatraz actually have no criminal charges whatsoever. So again, similar to what we saw when they sent immigrants to Guantanamo Bay, similar to what we saw when they sent immigrants to CCOT, in spite of the representation that this would be the worst of the worst, in fact, you're sending hundreds of people here who have no criminal charges in the United States whatsoever, and it's completely at odds with the portrayal here. And some of the people who have been picked up, it's just like, oh, they had a traffic ticket, something of that nature. And I think Maxwell Frost in that particular side said that he heard people saying, "Hey, I'm a U.S. citizen," and it's very maybe not, but it's just you can't trust this administration to handle any of this in anything approaching an appropriate manner, and they will just lie about the types of people that they are ultimately picking up here.
Yeah, it is difficult. I mean, I am very torn. I'm somebody who's, I don't think it's, you would admit this, I'm radical on the issue. At the end of the day, I don't believe in exclusion. If you came here illegally, I think you should go. I mean, I'm fine with, prioritization and all of that, but yeah. I don't know. I personally just get very, annoyed at, do we have any of that raid footage of the California thing? That's the perfect example to me. Like, you have a weed farm, which is still federally illegal, where you have people who are illegal working there, 9 of whom are unaccompanied minors, many of whom, almost all, are illegal, so that people in California can get high and they are working at like slave wages. It's like, how is that a reasonable system? Like, why is the governor of California and other standing up and saying, actually, this is all totally above board? I'm like, no, this is disgusting. It's bad for the kids. And then it's like the only time anybody expresses any outrage is whenever you send people who are being exploited here back to where they came from. It's like the whole system is all fucked up. But but I don't know, and people only care when they're removed. The status quo seems like fine. I mean, I don't think you support that, but functionally, that's where the Democratic Party was on the immigration issue. All this slave labor is totally okay. All of this unchecked illegal migration. You have children basically working in these like marijuana fields so that rich yuppies in Venice Beach can get high. I'm sorry, that's a gross order to the way that our whole society works. And it's like we only care whenever somebody goes and either takes care or arrests them. Some of these people have serious criminal charges. That's where everyone's like, oh, the cruelty of this. Is there no cruelty in the fact that these people, these kids are working to pick weed so that rich yuppies or whatever can get high?
Yeah.
I think that's cruel. I think it's bad. Why did nobody say anything when they were being sent here across the border? What kind of a parent is sending their kid illegally across the border to go work in a weed field? And yet, these asylum and all. It's like, no, I'm sorry, that's bullshit. I mean, nobody cared.
I don't really personally care what type of farm it is, but I mean, here's the thing though, Saagar, is that you're expressing a view of caring about cruelty or human rights and dignity. And so when you see someone who's being exploited by a system where, they're these farms are labor abuses, hiring literal children, which is outrageous. They should be prosecuted for that, no doubt about it. But then you're taking the farm worker and you're shipping them to, a place like Alligator Alcatraz, or just out of the country, no due process, to be abused and effectively tortured and held in completely inhumane conditions. That is certainly not a reflection of any sort of concern for humanity or dignity.
I don't disagree per se, but it's look, it's a stop off on the way for deportation. You were not supposed to be here. At the end of the day, you came here illegally. There are consequences for breaking the law. And there's also this idea that there's a statute of limitations. It's oh, but they've been here for years. It's okay, I mean, you came here, you shouldn't have been here, you're working illegally, of course you're liable to consequences for your actions. It's we take the agency away from these people and from the system.
But I think you have to acknowledge, though, I mean, the point of a place like Alligator Alcatraz is a demonstration of horror. I mean, that's what it is intended to do. And that's the reason also for there's a freaking helicopter that landed in this field in this farm raid, and they're coming in these armored vehicles and with, the military gear and all of these sorts of things. It's meant to terrorize. That is the goal. It's meant to terrorize. And so while I think it's certainly reasonable to say, okay, well, how many people can we absorb and what's the appropriate level? These are questions nations have to ask themselves. I don't think that many people find it acceptable that someone whose only crime was, which is not even, a felony or whatever, it's a civil infraction, but whose only crime is crossing the border illegally and who has been living, working, doing the right thing, et cetera, that a punishment commensurate with that is being put into these horrific conditions in whether it's Alligator Alcatraz or the other detention facilities also have quite abhorrent conditions as well.
Then how do you deport somebody?
I think but that's a reasonable question.
Just tell them to leave? They're not going to leave. Okay, they don't leave.
But actually, in reality, the number of people who do show up for their court hearings is quite high.
But you're talking about asylum. I'm talking about people who are already here.
But number two, another option is we have these things called ankle bracelets where you are monitored and tracked. And so it doesn't require insane cruelty. So, your working assumption here is that they're trying to, in a good faith way, I don't even know if you really believe this, but in a good faith way, deal with this logistical challenge.
No, I'm not talking.
And I don't think that they are dealing in a good faith way with this logistical challenge. I think there are many other routes, even if you wanted to accomplish the goal, which is not a goal I agree with, that would not entail mass institutionalized cruelty. But they intentionally choose the mass institutionalized cruelty and don't look for any solution that would, probably create an even more rapid outcome, but that does not include that sort of horror, because the horror and the terror, that is a core part of their goal.
I don't disagree that it's a part of a strategy to get them to go, but it's also we do this for criminals too. If you, for example, drunk driving is not, I believe so, right? It's not a felony. What am I getting wrong here? There's something about, I think there's some type of whatever for a misdemeanor, you'll lose your license. You get thrown in the drunk tank, no? You get to go to prison. Do you know why you do? Or not prison, you get to go to jail for a couple of days, and you eat a sandwich and a bag of chips that's standard prison food fare. here. Why? Because drunk driving is bad. You broke the law. It's also, I think it's not a Class A felony or whatever. There are all kinds of things for which we have preemptive or we have punishment in which, yes, some of the treatment is part of the course to trying to discourage, to make sure that you don't participate in this illegal activity. And like, that's what I'm saying, is you come here illegally, you take advantage of the United States, of the openness of the United States of America. There's also this talk about paying taxes. It's total bullshit.
No, it's
like,
not.
Yes, absolutely.
No, it's not.
Oh, yes.
No, it's not.
Vast numbers of 30 million illegals are filing their income taxes?
Yes,
Come on.
actually.
No.
There is
the number
there is a significant
Yes,
tax contribution from undocumented immigrants.
Once again, like, if you look at that statistically compared to Gen Pop, and then also, even if that is the case, you're not supposed to be here at a principal level. And if we add up all the welfare and Medicaid and hospital bills of all these people in our society, I'd be willing to bet it's still a net negative on a social basis. Just purely net in, net out. You can make GDP arguments in other cases. But it just comes back to like, yes, there are consequences for breaking the law. If you want to change that law, be my guest. Biden, Obama, all these people had multiple houses of Congress, and they never did so. As long as the system is, currently constituted, you're here illegally. There are consequences for doing that. Yes, I think the government in many cases has both lied and gone too far under the Trump administration, but the core goal is still one that I think most people would want, of some sort of order, and the fact that we have to know who you are here, and yes, that if you came here illegally under false pretenses, at the very least, the government needs to check you out, and we need to figure out what's going on. And my belief is you should be sent back to where you came from, and perhaps in the future we can have some sort of reapply. Now, many people will disagree with me on that subject, but I really don't know how you could have lived through the Biden administration and the way that the permission structure came for what 8 to 10 million people flow illegally into our country, and not believe in like a serious effort to deal with this at a law and order level. I really just don't know how we can still come down to compassion and asylum. It's like these people are the biggest abusers of U.S. asylum law in all of history. They're all economic migrants. They'll admit it if you ask them. And it's like, we're just supposed to let them in and give them citizenship, apparently, because they, quote, want a better life. You can want a better life wherever you are. There are people all over the world who want a better life. Just because you have the proximity to walk into the United States of America, you're not special.
I mean, Saagar, obviously I disagree with you on the policy, but I think what the, punishment throughout history for that has been getting deported back to your home country, not to some random third country where you may be in danger and don't speak the language and don't know anyone and have never been, not being disappeared, which is what's happening without even any record, into, some place that has been set up to intentionally be cruel and horrific and deny you basic human rights, not to be disappeared into a foreign slave labor gulag like CCOT. The idea, okay, you're here illegally, you're gonna go, the country has voted and they've decided we only want a certain level of undocumented population, you're going back to your home country. Yeah. That's been the idea.
But what do you do when the home
this
country won't take them?
Ultimately
That's
goes.
the issue. Why do you think they're going to a third country? Because they don't want them back.
But that's not even true.
What are we supposed to do?
But that's not even true in many instances. So for example, Venezuela.
Yeah.
There were ongoing negotiations. Venezuela was accepting immigration return, deportation return flights into that country. So, you can't. You also can't act like the Trump administration has no power here to make a deal and do some diplomacy to be able to effectuate those returns. But just on the numbers of how people feel about this now, and it's actually not that different from how they felt about it when Trump was running on mass deportation. 78% say that they would like to see a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are living in the U.S. illegally if they meet certain requirements. So there is a sort of very widespread acceptance of immigration, of being an important part of the fabric and character of this nation, of the sense of hey, if you're here and you did the right thing and you were working and you didn't do anything wrong, we should give you a chance to become a citizen. That is a very popular and widespread view. And like I was saying, that number has gone up, but actually in 2024, it was still 70% who felt that way. So I think people are very on board with okay, you're a criminal, you're in a gang, whatever, yes, let's get you out of here. But the reason that there's been such a backlash is when you go much beyond that, it does start to rub up against people's sense of actually what America is, and certainly the way that they want to see people treated by their government, whether they're citizen or not.
Look, that's just going to be a disagreement. You broke the law. You came here illegally. Just because you happen to be here and allegedly didn't commit a crime, except for the first crime that you did by entering our country, you get a free pass. It's crazy to me. All right, it's an insult to the millions of people who spent, people like my parents and others who came here legally, spent thousands of dollars of their own money going through the process. It's a pain in the ass. Ask anybody who's ever done it. And because somebody gets to walk here and then be basically low-wage labor, they're allowed, a special process just by being here long enough. It's preposterous. I mean, and it's one of those, look, I'll keep making that case forever up until the day they do eventually pass amnesty. I don't think there's any basic fairness. It is completely preferential treatment. It is just like, I don't know. We've debated this, forever.
Yeah.
To continue.
So. Well, one last news item I do want to slip in here on immigration. Let's put D5 up on the screen. There was a significant court decision in California halting what they're describing as indiscriminate immigration stops in LA and beyond. And basically what a judge found here is that, a lot of credible evidence that they are just basically racially profiling, roll up on the Home Depot, see some Latino, Spanish speakers and just arrest them. And we've got a number of instances. One that was a part of this case in particular, it was actually a car wash. And the guy was like, I'm an American citizen. Here is my identification. And they were like, you don't have your passport, so that's not good enough, so we're arresting you. And they had other instances too where, this seems to be the sort of approach of just we're gonna go into places where we think that undocumented immigrants congregate. We're gonna check out whether you're speaking Spanish and what your skin tone is, et cetera. And we're gonna arrest you if we have any suspicion whatsoever, not based on anything other than basically ethnicity and the location that you are. And you have a judge who says, that's racial profiling. You can't do that. That's against the Fourth Amendment.
Right. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.